大家早安，阿弥陀佛。Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to express my gratitude to the organizers of the conference for inviting me and say how pleased I am to be here with this distinguished panel and meeting with the Mahasangha today from so many different places, so many different colored robes. It's really a wonderful sight. And also particularly Mr. Liao Kok Ming and Dr. Victor Wee and Benny Liao, who have been communicating with me from California, and all the conditions came together so I could be here today. Unraveling the mind is something that we do either skillfully or unskillfully. Unskillfully would be sitting in front of the TV or your computer. The mind doesn't unravel, it kind of melts. And that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about doing it skillfully, which is to say using Dharma methods. And in the Chan tradition, after 32 years as a Buddhist monk in the teaching line of the late Venerable Master Xuanhua, I have some insights I'd like to share with folks today, and mindful of the time limitations. Many people think of Chan as cross-legged meditation only. In fact, in America, people think Buddhism equals meditation. Pretty much that's it. It's still early. It's still the dawn of the Dharma in America. But I found that contrary to this stereotype that Buddhism is simply by and large meditation, that the Chan tradition in fact uses a variety of tools, not just still sitting, in the process of awakening. Tools such as bowing, repentance, reciting sacred names and mantras, lecturing on sutras, just to name a few, all within the Chan tradition. A variety of techniques is necessary because Chan practice uses the human mind to transform consciousness into wisdom. And consciousness, as we heard earlier from Venerable Mahinda, is layers. The skandhas translate as heaps, just layers and layers and layers of awareness, all packed on one on top of the other. In this morning's presentation, in the time that I have, I'd like to describe my personal experience with a variety of Chan techniques for unraveling, calming, and purifying the mind. And it's certainly a work in progress, I must say. The Buddha came into the world, as we know, Prince Siddhartha, with deep, thick blessings. He had a sound body. He was a champion in everything he did. He had a wholesome mind and every educational opportunity. All the conditions were there for developing a superior person. Even so, after he first made the resolve for Bodhi and jumped over the palace wall and went to the woods for 6 years, it took him 6 long years with a huge variety of techniques to get himself to the Bodhi tree, and then another 49 days to sit still with a very firm resolve before he could experience the truth of his mind. So the Buddha was said to be, in the Chinese we say, Ye Jin Qing Kong, his karma was over and his emotions were emptied out. And that was a result of hard work, beginning where he did, with the conditions of the riverbank, the tree, in the woods, in the forest. So everything was very copacetic, you might say. And it still took him intense effort to see the nature of the mind. Now, by comparison, it may be, you might say, a greater challenge for us in the 21st century to concentrate and purify the mind than it was in the Buddha's time. That's a hypothesis. Is it harder now? Probably so. I would think so. We're surrounded by random noise. We're surrounded by the lure of the marketplace, which is pretty insidious. The average young person spends their day with more liquid crystal display readouts than they do with their parents. You know what I'm talking about, right? The average kid has what? A Game Boy, a cell phone, maybe a PDA, a laptop, a TV, and now an iPhone. Not in Malaysia yet, I understand, but that's coming soon, certainly. So this is what we give our consciousness to, And it's still the case that anytime we transform confusion into awakening, it's a result of hard work. Where am I spending my time? As they say, the days and nights are relentlessly passing. How well am I spending my time? Well, if I spend it with digital readouts, then that's what I'm doing with my consciousness. If I spend it looking instead at you could say, the digital readout of my mind, then that's the amount of skill I have. Nonetheless, this being the case, in theory, our potential for awakening is no different than the Buddha's. We still use the same human mind to accomplish the task the Buddha faced 2,500 years ago, no different. My own personal first experience with calming the mind in the context of Buddhism happened in 1969 when I lived at Antaiji in Kyoto, a tiny Zen monastery with Uchiyama Roshi there. This is the Soto school, and they teach Shikan Taza, right? 止观打坐. You only look at your mind. No huatou, no koan. You simply look at your mind. Well, this was my very first prolonged experience of meditation. It was an intensive, week-long, silent Zen sesshin. Sesshin o shimashita. Wow. I went into it cold. I went from 0 to 60 in about 120 seconds, I must say. Zen, strictly speaking, is the Japanese equivalent of Chinese Chan, and the process of meditation is analogous. So, in a sense, it's not purely Chan, it was Zen, but they're cousins. This included 8 hours of sitting per day in silence, total silence, and kinhin as well, walking meditation. And totally unexpected, my mind started to regurgitate music, television, advertisements, movies, TV shows, and every evil thing I'd done my whole life long. It was as if somebody had set my internal tape recorder to rewind. And all of these images were flashing in front of my mind, one after the other after the other. I was completely not in control of the contents of my mind. How different from the ecstatic bliss that I had expected, right? And was figuring, gee, am I in the right place? Maybe I should get a refund at the end of my retreat. So my inner eye and inner ear were subjected to a relentless showcase of particularly entertainment that I had put before my eyes and ears over my childhood. How humbling to realize how many beer commercials I had memorized, right? Blatt's beer tastes great wherever you go. I thought this was Zazen. Wait a minute. You know, so constantly rolling up. I reviewed my music library, album after album, song after song, and it was humbling to realize that I had 3 days worth of music memorized in my mind, totally unaware that my 6 senses had been operating like sponges to soak up absolutely everything that I had put before them, very clearly. And stranger than that was to realize that I had those experiences with all the senses intact. This was a shocker. It wasn't just black and white. It wasn't just the audio without the video. It was all the senses intact, including the tactile. How strange to review an experience of, for example, scolding my parents, which is not recommended, not a good idea. It's kind of like chopping away at the roots of your own tree with an axe. And when I'm sitting in meditation, to have the entire experience, including the flush of my face and the heat rising, come back to my sitting. So this was totally unexpected. Now, how skillful was I in terms of unraveling the mind? Well, 1 Tylenol a day, usually after lunch, was my absolutely unskillful coping mechanism. I had just begun to meditate. Further, down the street from the monastery was a little Japanese bread shop. It was kind of an early 7-Eleven in Japan. And I would run down. We had a half-hour break in the middle of the morning, and I would run down and give them 15 yen and take a loaf of raisin bread. Raisin pan no tabemashita. And I would take the raisin bread and walk back, stuffing it in my face as fast as I could, just to fill up the emptiness that I was suddenly experiencing and all of this regurgitation. So very much not what I had expected about my first Chan retreat.